That interview there, NDP MP Leah Gazan tabled that bill yesterday, calling for an amendment to the criminal code to criminalize the downplaying or denying of the harms of residential schools in Canada. Leah Gazan joins me in studio right now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me.
First question to you. You heard the minister right there, his response about whether or not he would be supportive of it. How did you feel about how he responded?
Well, I think the issue is that, we need to deal with the rise of residential school denialism that has occurred since the discovery of the unmarked graves. Although he seems personally, interested in looking at it, this government has failed at every step. We are 10 years out from the final report of the National Inquiry, from the National Inquiry's, the Truth and Reconciliation Report, and they barely moved on many of the calls to action. And in the midst of this, we see a rise in denialism. 10 years out, do we want to go back 10 years? 10 years since survivors came forward sharing their stories. We need to protect their stories. We need to protect survivors, families, and communities.
This private member's bill is personal for you. Tell me why.
Well, certainly, my family has been impacted by residential school. My partner has been impacted in residential school. I can't think of anything more violent than denying somebody's residential school history. What happened in residential school, as we know, in 2023, all MPs unanimously supported a motion I put forward recognizing what happened in residential school as an act of genocide, according to, as it is defined, in fact, under the UN Article 2 UN Convention on Genocide. It's one thing to acknowledge that. It's another thing to act on it. Survivors, families, and communities are constantly being victimized by this growth in residential school denialism. We have to protect survivors and their stories.
And also for you, and your heritage as well, if I'm not mistaken, your mother was a Chinese and Lakota woman. Your father also survived the Holocaust.
Yeah, so basically that's exactly what my bill proposes to do, is to add to Section 319 of the Criminal Code, which recognizes Holocaust denial as a hate crime, residential school denial. And I can tell you, as somebody who has history in two parts of the world, my father being the only child that survived, five family members in total after the Holocaust, having that acknowledged that it is not acceptable to question that side of my history is critical. Back in the day, Jim Keekstra in Alberta, an Alberta teacher, teaching Holocaust denial in schools, was punished for that kind of misinformation, that hurtful misinformation. All I'm asking is to amend the criminal code to include Indigenous people. We recognized it unanimously in the House as a genocide. How is this government going to truly act to protect truth and the story of survivors? We cannot reconcile in this country unless we protect the truth.
Are you concerned that private members' bills rarely pass? They rarely pass. Are you concerned about this one and that it won't have the full support?
Well, that's up to the Liberal government. I mean, when Trudeau was elected in 2015, he said the most important relationship is with Indigenous people. Yet, we are now in 2024. We still have water boil advisories. They've barely moved on the calls for justice of the National Inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. They barely moved on the TRC calls to action. This is a call for them to act. This is a call for them to act and demonstrate if they are truly committed to reconciling in this country. And that starts with protecting the folks that gifted this country towards a path of reconciliation. And that is survivors, first and foremost, family members and communities. So I call on the minister and all members of Parliament, certainly on the government side, to act. Now, the Conservatives, I'm concerned about. I mean, we have a leader of the Conservative Party that is meeting with think tanks like Frontier Centre that have published articles denying residential school, downplaying residential school, the experiences in residential school, fundraising with Frontier Centre.
But has he specifically come out and said it? I mean, I know that you have said in other interviews that there are some politicians that have denied it, and the example that is cited is the former Conservative Senator Lynn Bayak, who resigned in 2021 after defending some aspects of the residential school system. But Mr. Poilievre specifically, and the members of his caucus right now, have they said anything that makes you think that they are in this realm of denialism? Because at this point, I have not.
Well, what I can say is that, the current leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, is on record, in the past, in ministerial roles, saying that, speaking out against the settlement, the residential school settlement, saying we just, need to get back to work. I mean, those kind of cold and callous comments. And I do think we need to question why somebody who wants to become the next prime minister, who has the goal of that, why he would choose to meet with think tanks and fundraise with think tanks that are on the record as residential school denialists. And
you've seen him meet with them, or you have the proof?
No,
of them?
he's had fundraisers, and it's on record. It was public. It was in the news with Frontier Centre. That concerns me, certainly in terms of his relationship with Indigenous peoples in this country. If he's truly willing to reconcile with Indigenous peoples. Now, I know where the Liberals are at. They're still patting themselves on the back about incremental justice when it comes to water boil advisories. Like, this should be an accomplishment. Like, not every person that lives in Canada should have clean water. So I'm used to that behavior. Mm-hmm. But I also am concerned about behaviors and comments that I've heard in the House, downplaying residential schools, downplaying the damage that it caused, especially as elected officials. I'm calling everybody in the House. I'm calling on all members of Parliament to do better and to do the right thing and help push this bill forward.
And just to be clear, when you say you've heard these calls of downplaying it, from specific people, or is there something that you would like to bring up as an example?
Yeah, certainly Aaron O'Toole he's
the former leader.
The former leader.
He's no longer part of the party.
Yeah, right. The former leader of the Conservative Party was on record, and certainly it was in the news. He apologized about his comments downplaying and minimizing the harms and genocide that happened in residential school. I've mentioned Lynn Bayak.
Right.
And then, other comments, if you look in the Hansard, from other members of Parliament, downplaying the harms of residential school, trying to minimize what has happened in the schools. There's lots of things in media that you can look up. We need to do better. We need to do better as elected officials, because I know people across Canada, particularly as somebody who taught at the University of Winnipeg. I taught Aboriginal education for many years, teaching about residential school, that even people who don't know, when they know, they want to do better. Canadians are good. Canadians are good. Most Canadians are truly dedicated to reconciling this country, to learning about the truth, to forging a path forward together, to ensure justice.
Right.
We need to emulate that as elected officials in this country, and unfortunately, I don't see that from all members of Parliament.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. NDP MP Leah Gazan, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up.